What's up, Relentless students? Dakota here. I want to jump into our fourth entry of the Can I Ask That series. So first, can I ask a question? How are you guys doing? I haven't been able to talk to like half of you guys, and I don't know who all's watching this, so I don't know who's maybe looking at this that hasn't actually been able to reach out. So guys, I hope you're doing well. I hope the quarantine is treating you nicely. You haven't decided to go completely insane yet, and that you're surviving this all right. Um, so with this, guys, so we're in this Can I Ask That series, right? And so this is week 4. This is actually the final week of this series. The last few weeks we've asked some pretty tough questions. Some with some answers that can be a little hard to swallow. Some with some arguments that we've maybe never heard, for or against, right? So we said, can I trust the Bible? To which we said, yes, you can trust the Bible based on how it was written, outside sources, things like that. It's not even just internally that you can trust it, but on top of that, it does say inside of there that it's trustworthy, right? It's able to be used for teaching and rebuking and things of that nature, right? Does the Bible contradict itself? And we said no. And in fact, a lot of those pieces that may look like contradictions aren't contradictions, but are personal, like, um, preferences that are coming onto the page showing the humans writing this book, which can actually add more to the value of looking at it as a true and proper account of Jesus's life and things of that nature, right? Third question we asked was, is Jesus really the only way to God? And we tackled that both from an understanding of what do other religions say about Jesus, about what it takes to get to heaven. What does God look like to them? And then looking at what Jesus said in the Word and how he said that I am the way. And so we said, yes, he is the only way to God. So then today we're going to continue with these kind of tough questions. And we're asking, how can I follow a God who would let Christians do such bad things? Okay, so when we're looking at this, it's like, maybe you've never heard that question before. Maybe you've gotten this one a lot. So let me reword it a little bit. How can you be a Christian when they're the ones that did all the terrible things in the past and who are hypocrites? How can you be a Christian when they really just think they're better than everybody else? Like, and they ask it like that. But regardless, they're asking the same question. How can you serve a God who would let Christians do such bad things? And so with that, guys, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about some of the arguments that those people will use to say, like, how can you follow this God? We're going to look at what is the root of the problem, right? And we're gonna talk about that, and we're going to talk about some counter arguments and talk about yes, but. Okay, so when we're looking at the arguments that they have, how many of you guys have actually heard somebody speak bad about Christians, say they're terrible people, things like that? Maybe you heard it on TV on one of the shows you're watching. Maybe it was in some book that you were reading for class, or maybe just for fun. Maybe it was on social media with different friends that you have at school, or some random page that you liked. I just wanted to poke a little jab, things like that. Or maybe it was at school. Maybe it was one of your friends, and maybe it was actually to you, right? It's one of those things that we've all typically heard it from somewhere, but we don't know where. And so I want to take a second. I want to ask, how did you respond? And obviously, I'm in a room by myself, so nobody's going to answer this question. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to take time and think about that. You can pause this if you need to, and then just post it in the comments. Say, like, yeah, typically when this happens, this is how I respond. For me, I rush it off. I say, I'm not like fill in whatever negative you want. So obviously Christians aren't just this blanket statement, right? I'm honest about my faults. I'm not hypocritical. So obviously not all Christians are hypocrites. Something to that nature. I try to just, yeah, but look at me. I'm not like that. And if they're calling me out for something, I'm typically over there going, yeah, you're not wrong. I messed up. I'm sorry. And so that's kind of how I respond. I'm curious how you guys respond to those, so feel free, like I said, put those in the comments there. So what are some things that people say about Christians that can inspire a topic like this? What are things that they'll say? They'll call us hypocrites, right? We say one thing and we do another. We say, oh yeah, we're forgiven, and we are, we're loving, we're good, we're kind, we're looking at like the fruits of the Spirit, and then we're going to turn around and backstab one of our friends, or we're going to snitch on them for something they did, or we're going to lie, we're going to cheat, we're going to steal, we're going to do something that contradicts, right? And so there's this hypocritical piece to it, right? We say one thing, we do another. We contradict ourselves, right? They'll say that, like, when you look at the Bible, in the Old Testament, they had slaves. But then in the New Testament, you got somebody, Paul, saying, there's no one different under Christ, right? There's no slave nor free. We're all one in Christ. You have things like that were committed, like violence, like when you look at like the Crusades, right? Or the Spanish Inquisition, or slavery in the U.S. when it came over. A lot of those people, so the Crusades were done by the church. The Spanish Inquisition was inspired by the church. And slavery, though maybe not inspired, was still used by the church. And so you have this idea that we were committing violence alongside of some pretty nasty people, and some of it we were even inspiring, right? And so they're asking, how can we follow a God when these people act like this? How can you? And so this is where I say we need to look at the root of the problem, right? Because I'm gonna be real with you guys. We can't fight what they're saying. A lot of Christians out there are hypocrites. A lot of Christians out there, they say one thing and they do another, right? The Bible does have some stuff where it looks like it may be contradicting because things have progressed over time, right? Culture changes. And so with that, there were some nuances that were happening as we see it. It wasn't like a full-blown change. It was, hey guys, since you're doing this, I'm going to add some structure to it. Okay, since you're not doing this, let's make sure we don't go back to this kind of thing, right? And that was God talking to his people versus God saying, this is how I want you to do it. It wasn't him, it was his people, right? So what's the root of the problem? Drum roll, please. People! Yeah, you, me, and Joe over here, this guy, Marky Mark over here, like everybody, right? People are the problem. Humanity is broken, and when we call ourselves Christians, we don't suddenly change. There's no miraculous, my sin is gone completely to the point that I never enacted again. How many of you guys, since claiming to be a Christian, have committed a sin? Raise of hands. Everybody's hands should be up right now. Granted, you might be alone in your room and you don't want to raise your hand. It's up in your mind. I know it. I see it. It's fine. All right. So with that, guys, right, we all still sin. Now, does being a Christian and being forgiven give us permission to continue sinning? No. In fact, it gives us permission to confess and say, guys, I'm sorry that I messed up. Allow me to make it right. And being real and understanding that Christians do make these mistakes, that Christians do mess up, and so you and me are going to mess up too, that we're going to have this sin nature. Something we have to remember, right? I don't know, this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to have to mesh with this a little bit. God gave us free will. How many of you guys know what free will is? I keep asking these questions like you're in the room with me and you're not. So free will, right? Free will is the idea that God gave us the ability to have a choice. It's what means that when you decide that you want to get up and eat breakfast that day, you chose that. God didn't write that into being. That is how you decided to live. Now, does God know every choice you're going to make? Yes. That's the idea of sovereignty. He knows the choices that you're going to make, but gave you the ability to make your own choices. And so with that in mind, guys, we have free will. We make the choice. So who then is responsible for the actions that are committed by Christians? People, humanity, us. We are still responsible for our actions because God gave us free will. He gave us the ability to choose what we are going to say and what we're going to do. And so with that in mind, guys, he's also the one that gives us the free will to choose him or to deny him, right? There's this idea, there's complete choice in that. Does he know what's going to happen? Yes. But does knowledge make you responsible? No. What makes you responsible is making the choice and actually enacting that choice, which is what you and I are the ones doing. And so with this, guys, he allowed free will. He did not allow evil. Okay? We are responsible for bringing in evil. We are responsible for our actions. Evil was a choice that was made by that specific human, and so they are the ones that are responsible. Okay, so we've talked about what are their arguments, right? And they've got some pretty strong ones, and they've got some really true ones. We've talked about the actual problem, right? Is this idea that we are still sinful. So what are some counter arguments? What are some things that we can say in response and say, yes, but? And that's what we're going to say. There's a lot of good that has been done in his name. Okay, so we're talking about the Crusades, right? That was literally in the name of Jesus, let us go and cleanse these people, which kind of meant killing them. But now we're going to talk about, in Jesus' name, let's set up these things. Let's do these things, right? First off, preservation of life. How long? So when you were born back in Western culture, okay, so this is our culture, way back when, during like the biblical times, so I guess still kind of Eastern culture, whatever. All right, early 2,000 years ago, whatever. What happened when you were born? Do you think that you were given a name right away? Mom and dad loved you and all was good and all was well in the world? Then you would be wrong. You see, when people were born, they would give the parents 7 days to give that child a name. Because by giving them 7 days, they had that amount of time to decide, do I want this child? Let's say they wanted a boy and you were a girl. They had 7 days to decide, do I dispose of the child or do I keep it? And disposal was not nice. You literally just threw them out. Like, no care whatsoever. Okay? Did they have some sort of imperfection that you weren't okay with? Things like that, right? And so what ends up happening is that Christians stepped in. We have the early apostles, the early disciples stepping in saying, let us preserve life. Name them at birth. If you don't want them, we'll create orphanages. We'll find places for these children. Right? They started this idea of preservation of life. Second thing that they did. How many of you guys have ever been to a hospital? I'm assuming all of your hands are up again. Again, I can't see you. Hospitals, with modern medicine, the way that we do hospitals was actually started by the early disciples because they felt, it's this idea, right? In Matthew 25, it talks about whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. And so they were starting to spread this idea that, hey guys, we need to do community medicine. We need to be helping people, not pushing them out. You know, there's this idea, if you guys read through the Gospels, you'll see accounts of where people were sick or with leprosy were pushed to the outskirts of the city because they didn't want to deal with the sickness in the city and possible contagions getting around. Almost like COVID, right? We're being forced to be in our homes. They were forced out and away from people. And so it was the Christians, it was the early Christians, those early disciples and apostles who said, no, this isn't right. And they created spaces for people to get care that they needed so they could save more lives. Hospitals were started by Christians. How many of you guys are looking to go into college when you're done with high school and all of that stuff, when you're going into your early adult? How many of you guys think about college, right? I went to college. I was there for 5 years, 4 years, 5 years. Right? 92% of the 138 original universities here in America were started by Christians. Why was that? It's this idea that, you know, Jesus says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And so for them, they were saying as Christians, they're like, oh, if we're going to love God with our mind, we need to continue learning about Him or continue learning in general because that's how we can learn to love more and actually love God. And so they were pushing for higher learning to create a space for them to grow in their relationship with God, right? That's why universities exist. That's why colleges started, right? And so then from there, let's talk about slavery, all right? We said the early Christians were the ones that were kind of helping. Yeah, except let's talk about the fact that slavery was partially ended by Christians who were willing to stand up for it, with the idea of the Quakers and things like that. And on top of that, you have significant figures in the civil rights movements like Martin Luther King Jr., who was a Christian, who was focused solely on what Paul said when he said, you are no longer Jew or Greek, no longer slave or free, male or female, all are one in Christ. And so he was driven by this idea that Jesus set us free from there being slaves or free men. We are all freed from that. Right? Or let's talk about this idea of humility. So when it comes to humility and being willing to say, not my will but yours, or the idea of turning the other cheek, or the idea of just letting go and allowing forgiveness was not common until Jesus came. It was Jesus who pushed for that, and it was in his life that we have this example that people started living by and saying, I'm going to be humble now and live in humility. Jesus lived in humility to the point that he died on a cross for us. Right? It was this ultimate showcase of what humility looks like. And again, in that time, in that culture, that didn't exist. It exists the way it does today because of what Jesus did. So the biggest thing is this, the final argument is this: agree with their points. Say, guys, you're right. There are a bunch of Christians who did those terrible things. But it was the people that did the messed up things in the name of God, not God, first off. Secondly, look at who Jesus was. Does that actually reflect him? Then do they really truly know who he was to claim him? And call into question their ability to even claim to be Christians, right? Call into question the idea that they actually believed in a Jesus who would allow such a thing, because that's not the Jesus of the Bible. All right, so what do we do? So when we're looking at this idea and we're trying to ask this question, there's a couple of passages that come to mind. And one of the big ones, guys, is Matthew 7. So this is Jesus talking. In Matthew 7, verses 15 through 20, it says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered by the thorn bushes, or figs by the thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits." So he keeps fruits, right? For those of you who don't know what the fruit of the Spirit are, go check out Galatians 5, 22 through 24. Galatians 5, 22 through 24. There's a full list of the fruits of the Spirit. But the idea, guys, is we look at that list, right? We say, these are the fruits of what a Christian is. This is what Jesus said to look for, okay? Those who are not being fruitful are not truly believing in him, because belief in him, true belief in him, will cause us to want to change and act and transform our lives to look more and more like him. We can't just stand back and allow ourselves to continue living in sin. And living as a Christian, we feel that. There's this tension that is in us that we have to keep moving toward this transformation, right? And so with that, guys, people who can proclaim him all day long. But if they don't show signs of growth, then A, do they actually believe? And B, are they looking like Jesus? If they're not looking like Jesus, do they actually believe? If they actually believe, they should be looking like Jesus. And trying to. And again, there's going to be this idea that there's still going to be failures. There's still going to be mistakes there. But are they seeking forgiveness in that? Are they being honest about, guys, that was me, I'm sorry? And so there's also this idea of knowledge versus practice. Do they simply claim Jesus because of what they know, or are they living out his truths in their actions? And so in James chapter 1, verses 22 through 24, so James chapter 1, it says, "But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in the mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away at once, at once forgets who he was." Okay, have you ever gone up, you're looking in your mirror, you're like, oh yeah, I should probably do my hair. Maybe you're a guy and you're like, I gotta shave, or maybe you got a pimple and you're like, I should probably pop that and take care of it. Yeah, we'll do that. And then you just walk away. You now are fully aware what's going on, what you need to change, and you decide to just kind of, and you're just gone, right? You don't do anything with it. When that's the case, that calls into question, do you actually believe? Again, it's this idea of when there's no change, what is going on? So finally, how do we actually respond? So first off, we accept the claims, okay, or the charges. People have claimed that people who have claimed our Jesus have done terrible things. We cannot deny the fact that throughout history, there are people who claimed Jesus, did things in his name that were terrible. They were not good. They were not what we were meant to do. Secondly, let's talk about the other side. Let's show the fact that there are people who did great good that was accomplished in his name. These people only did these things because of what Jesus did in them. And so there's this idea that not only was there this bad done, there was really good stuff done because of who Jesus is and because of what he inspired these people to do. And the last thing is for us to act. live like Jesus, and show signs that we are in spiritual growth, and then confess when we fall short. Be honest about the fact that, nope, I missed the mark today. My sin got a hold of me. And be willing to accept that and push through that for transformation, and give that to God. Give the space for him to say, yeah, dude, I'm sorry I messed up. And so when we claim Christ's name, our goal is to look like him. So when we fail, our goal is to fess up to us being human, and that in that moment we're not following God. And so how can we follow a God who lets Christians do such bad things? We understand that that sin nature doesn't just disappear. We don't just suddenly become good, but the bad inside of us still exists, right? Even when we believe. It's a constant struggle. This doesn't excuse the actions, but we have to look at the fruit and say, are they even trying to live like Jesus? And if not, can their claim be true, or is it null and void at that point? Because they're not even trying to live like him. There's no moments where you're going, oh yeah, they're pursuing goodness and kindness and patience, and no. At that point, if they're not doing any of those things, we know that they're not truly pursuing Jesus. And so how can we allow their claims to be justified, right? So we follow Jesus because he looks so radically different from us. And so how do we do it? Because he looks radically different from us, because we're willing to admit when we mess up, and because we don't instantly change, right? So guys, like I said, this is the last one for Can I Ask That series. And so we'll be jumping into a new series next week. I hope you guys have enjoyed addressing these questions. I'm going to be honest with you. There are a lot more questions out there. There are some really tough questions out there. There are things that there's some that I have on my list that we didn't talk about because it's something we've got to do face to face. And so guys, if there are more questions popping up as we're going through these series, please send them to me. I would love to look at your questions and get a chance to start doing some research so that we can talk about them as we come back together, or possibly do more videos like this for those. Guys, I hope all is well. I hope that you guys are surviving this quarantine. I hope to see you guys soon.